The Intertech Group and the Zucker family are proud to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
Welcome to We the Women. This is our celebration of the 19th Amendment. Exactly 100 years ago, on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving women the right to vote. To celebrate, we'll be talking to women from around South Carolina, thought leaders, movers and shakers. We'll ask them about how they have used their voice and what they have done to contribute to our great democracy. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm with Jill Muti, who's the head of school at Ashley Hall. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Well, no, thank you very much for having me. I was really looking forward to coming down and having a conversation about the movement and the anniversary and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ashley Hall and what the work you do there ties in perfectly to all of these conversations that we're having in a very real way today.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I was looking forward to chatting with you. So I guess maybe we can just give like a little bit of background for people who aren't maybe not familiar with Ashley Hall. It's an all-girls school established in 1909. I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
So, and that was 10 years before the ratification of the 19th, or maybe 11 years after this ratification. Why was it founded? And was it a big deal in that time to create an all-girls school?
Sure. So a little bit of history. Our founder was a woman by the name of Mary Vardreen Macby. And, she was originally from the South, actually North Carolina, and had wanted to go to university and went to the Northeast and couldn't enter university because of a series of exams that needed to be taken. And so when she got out of school, it really bothered her that she was coming from the South and that women from the South didn't have the same opportunities as their counterparts in the Northeast, and wanted to begin a school for women. Looked around a good bit and decided that Charleston was a perfect place to start her school. The curriculum was actually written in Columbia, and she brought several professors down with her from Columbia University when she started in 1909. And when you think about that, just in general, what was happening during that time period, as you say, it was before, a good 11 years before women, the suffrage movement and the amendment came about. So for Macby, and really it's really tied to our mission. I mean, the mission of our school, it's kind of transcended the sense of time and decades. It's to produce an educated woman who is independent, ethically responsible, and ready to meet the challenges of society with confidence. So when we are thinking about that independence and that responsibility ethically, that was pretty much her charge from day one when she came in. So of course it was the girls at the school providing just a top-notch education that would allow them to go to any women's college or university that they wanted to attend. And yet at the same time, it was really about how to create independent, self-reliant women and what that meant. She ended up really being a first in many ways in Charleston. She was the first woman to sit on the commission of the school board. She was advocated and the first woman to help with the public library system. Worked very much for the first kindergarten for under-resourced children. So her hands were a little bit everywhere. In terms of this specific movement, she was vice president of the South Carolina suffrage movement and, of course, part of the League of Women Voters. So this sense of being part of community, understanding the place and role that it was necessary to engage was vital from the time the school really began.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, especially when you think about 100 years ago, this mission of the school is to create an empowered, confident woman. So that's still the mission of the school today.
Yeah, I mean, it looks, obviously, and I think that a good mission, an independent school lives under mission, and it creates a sense of community and a sense of purpose. And we like to say that our alumni are our living legacy, and the way they live their lives really carries that mission forward and MACB's vision forward. But yeah, when you really think about the role she played and what it meant to start that school and keep it open. I mean, it was a proprietary school until 1954. And so, obviously that's affected the history of the school a good bit. And I'd also say, while it wasn't unusual to have single gender schools, it was the only, and still is, the only single gender school for women in the state of South Carolina.
Wow.
Secondary school, yeah.
Wow. Tell me about how you are fulfilling that mission today and how it's maybe changed from, the mission has stayed the same, but maybe how it is in practice established might be a little bit different today. And
Sure. So I think a great education really comes from understanding a sense of place and really understanding what's happening in the environment around you. And so every head of school throughout the history, I mean, Miss MACB was there through the early 50s, actually. So I'm only the 6th head of school when over 111 years, which is kind of interesting. I think that, there needs to be this sense of relevance, of what's ever happening in education. And yet at the same time, core concepts around what that education looks like. So for us, this idea of being independent and ethically responsible, our program now starts at 2. So what does independence look like for a 2-year-old? How do we create a sense of self-reliance? What does that look like when you're 10 or 12? And again, at 17 or 18. So firstly, when Miss MACB was there, there wasn't an early childhood division. It was a boarding school until 1974. The younger grades, it just depended on what was happening by the decades. So it was, even at the time, a very different place in terms of what we do now. Mm. I think we think about classical education, that trivium and quadrivium, which she brought from Columbia University, obviously very differently today. But so it's a powerful education that's based in inquiry-based learning and experiential learning. And that's, for us, what translates this independence and self-reliance. So, it's a lot of fun. It looks a little bit different than it did then, but I think not only the core values are what we now call our hallmarks, but this sense of the girls knowing, we say her world, our world, and the world, forces a connection to community. And community here in Charleston, within the state, what that looks like globally. And when they can make these connections to their education, and it becomes personal, then it creates a different kind of curiosity in terms of the way they live their lives. Yes.
I think it's interesting. I've spoken with a couple parents throughout for various stories I've been working on. And I remember one, she had like a 6-year-old. And she's like, my 6-year-old is learning how to write opinion, or, take an opinion and present it to the class. And she was just like blown away that a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old are doing this in their class. And I know through other, coverage that you talk about like experiential learning. You have girls building tiny houses. You have girls sailing, 150-ton ships down the Atlantic. Like, that's all really fascinating. I think that part of it ties into really teaching girls from a young age independence, and then kind of carrying that throughout their education, which I think is really fascinating. And we talked about the confidence pipeline,
right?
Really deliberate approach to technology and social media, and how that all impacts a young girl today.
It does.
Those are the pressures that maybe didn't exist.
Exactly. So, when we take a look at the role that technology has played, and this has even changed in the last 10, 5-10 years, and will continue to be a dynamic force, obviously, in all of our lives. I think we see it now more than ever during this pandemic. You know, it's again, how do we help create a sense of belonging for girls? How do they know themselves? How does that end up being actualized? And so we work on that. We start very early, you know, and it becomes a natural part of our curriculum and what we do. It sort of gets baked into the DNA of the girls that go to school there, and we're proud of that.
What is your vision moving forward for Ashley Hall and your tenure? You've accomplished a lot so far, and when you think about when we talk about girls' education specifically, is there anything that you set your sights on that you want to achieve moving forward?
Well, I think that there is this sense that when we give opportunity, that's somehow enough, and it's not. By any short measure. I mean, you know, yes, even, you know, my own educational experience, you know, 30, 40 years ago is very different than what the girls are experiencing today. But I think this idea of the role gender plays within societal norms continues and will continue to affect not only our educational process, the way we think about the world, and the way we try to make a difference in the world. So for me, firstly, this sense of living under mission has always been really important. And this idea of understanding yourself and knowing how you want to make a difference in the world is of paramount importance now more than ever. Especially when we read and know what is happening for an entire generation of young people.
Yeah. That's actually, I think that's really interesting. The sense of self is maybe, and the gender roles that still exist today. It's
Totally.
2020, but we know that we've made progress, but I think we still have a long way to go in some sense. So, what do you think? I've asked this question to everyone that I've spoken with for this, because I think it means something different to everyone. But when we talk about the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, what does it mean to you personally? I'm curious to hear your thoughts when you think about it and when you reflect on this milestone.
Well, I'm always surprised, you know, when I think of how many things in our country and society still aren't resolved. The role, you know, of what it means to be human and how things haven't changed for what feels like millennia. And we're celebrating something that, you know, I can't believe it's only been 100 years. I mean, it's shameful in so many ways, and yet is such a product of, you know, the history of our nation in general. And yet, you know, it for me personally, it's really created this kind of drive at the school to continue that legacy, the legacy of advocacy, of being grounded in community and place, of understanding the importance of beauty in the lives of everyone, what it means to be a citizen and civically responsible, not only for ourselves, but for others. So I guess that's, you know, some of what I think about when I think about the 19th Amendment.
Yeah. Can I ask how do you approach the subject, or how do teachers approach the subject if they do in the classroom, or not necessarily the 100th anniversary, but just in general, the right to vote, that process? Is that incorporated at all into the lesson?
Sure, and actually this year it's really interesting. The American Bar Association has put together a wonderful expose and a traveling show, which we'll be bringing to to Ashley Hall. Our hope was that we could open it up to the community. And now because of COVID-19, of course, it's changed actually what that will look like for us. But in a way, it's really terrific for the girls because it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we're going to use this show. So yes, it is addressed in curriculum. And I think always, there's this sort of juxtaposition for the girls sometimes because they're attending this all-girls school where, there's this kind of expectation around independence and finding your voice and being able to try a lot of different things and learning what it means to sort of brush yourself off and try something again if it didn't work the first time. And so, when you think of what that looks like on a daily basis and how that's lived, and then there's this reflection that this isn't the way it is or was. And I think is always sort of surprising for the girls. Everything from, when women were able to begin to play athletics, with this idea of being able, to vote. It's something that they obviously take for granted. And so when you step back and you take a look at it, it really allows us to open up lots of conversations around what's happening around the globe. Things that we take for granted aren't necessarily the same in other nations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also curious, just made me think of another question that I wanted to ask is, do you ever have to have like these difficult sort of conversations with these young girls that, while our mission is to train and, to make you a leader, you might get some pushback. You might not everyone, has the same respect for a woman in power that they might a man in power. And do you have to prepare them almost for that sort of maybe the eventuality that might be encountered, or is it less of a focus on that? I suppose that's a hard conversation, I guess. But
well, it's really a very interesting thing. So when I came to the school in 2004, I was at an alumni reception. And they were the board was introducing me to the constituency. And I had a young alum who was in law school at the time. And I was meeting her for the first time. And she came up and we had a lovely conversation. And I said, well, tell me about your experience at Ashley Hall. And she said, well, I was really taught that I could do anything and be anything. And I developed my voice to be able to feel empowered when I went to university, which was very helpful. She said, I think one thing, though, that really surprised me is that what I found on this campus isn't the way the world really works. And that was a huge shock. And so it really kind of got my own, wheels turning about how you create this space, which is really sacred for us, and is really important so that the girls do graduate and live that legacy in community, whatever that looks like for them. And yet also, whether it's dealt with directly or not, understanding that there's a resilience that they're going to need to weather things that they don't see coming, whatever that might look like. And so, yeah, sometimes they're difficult conversations. And I think that they're approached, our faculty mentor the girls so closely. And you have opportunities so many times when you're teaching or working collaboratively to be able to thread themes through whatever you're doing. So
that's interesting. And it's something that I hadn't thought about until kind of when I sat down with you, but I was like, I'm wondering if that's something that's addressed, because it's almost like a little oasis, this bubble kind of that you create on campus is somewhat different maybe when you exit.
Yeah, and I think, it's like for any 18-year-old, they're ready to take on the world and are really ready to leave, and which is exactly what you want, what we all want for them. And yet at the same time, it usually takes about 6 to 18 months before they realize, wow, what an opportunity I was given, and the world and all educational institutions don't function like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How have you lived your life as when we talk about the challenges that the students might encounter one day as leaders or as maybe a future woman in power? How have you navigated that in your personal life? And has there been any obstacles that you faced kind of working your way through this space?
Sure. I mean, I think, you have many women who are involved in education. And there's, tomes literally written on statistics and data of who's teaching, both in independent schools, private education, public education, the ratio of men to women. But in the field, as you move up into administration, there are, we haven't really moved the bar at all in terms of women in leadership since, the late 70s, believe it or not, especially around women heading schools. And when they are heading schools, we're, for the most part, heading single gender schools. And so, it's interesting. My first administrative experiences were really around a very male-dominated administrative team. And one of the things that was refreshing, but put me back on my heels a little bit when I came to Ashley Hall, was just these very vocal, well-spoken women who were going to make sure, whether it was around the board table or whether it was around an administrative table, that their voice was going to be heard. And it was new and refreshing and fun. For me personally, we've talked about this before, but I am also a professional musician. I'm a flutist. And I think, the world of classical music, just auditioning and what that really looks like, has had a huge impact on the way I think about not only education and the world, but definitely all of this.
Yeah. Is there any advice? This is probably my last question I think I have for you. Is there any advice, that you have now as you've sort of navigated these spaces that you would have to either your students or other young women who aren't enrolled at Ashley Hall but are still want to make a difference and are hoping to become leaders, or anything that you've learned, I suppose, that you think is important and worth sharing?
I think the last 5 months for most of us have created an opportunity for some really deep reflection, as much as you can with everything changing and moving. And, I think it's important to have a dream and to really understand your purpose or your role or what you want to try to achieve. And then just keep trying. And at the same time, I think being honest with yourself about when you're really learning and you're willing to be vulnerable about what you need to know is really important. So for the girls and for the administrators and the constituency in general, I think this idea of leading with your heart and understanding that the world is only going to become a better place if we're willing to roll up our shirt sleeves and make it so. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned a lot, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's such a wonderful thing that the Post and Courier is doing, and I'm just thrilled that I get a chance to talk about Miss Mackbee a little bit, because she was obviously a very special woman for us, and will be, Founders Day will be coming up for us very soon in September, and so it's exciting.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.